there's a Japanese word, just 6 letters long, that points to something so vast, so all-encompassing, that no amount of language can fully contain it. And yet, for over 1,000 years, monks have given up everything they own, sat in silence for decades, endured freezing cold and physical exhaustion, all in pursuit of this single experience. The word is Satori. And here is what makes it so fascinating. In the year 1708, a young Japanese monk named Hakuin Ekaku confined himself inside a shrine at a remote mountain temple. He had been studying Zen for years, agonizing over a riddle that had no logical answer. For 7 days straight, he barely slept. He barely ate. He sat in silence, wrestling with the deepest question the human mind can ask. What is the nature of reality? And then, on the 7th night, a distant temple bell rang through the cold mountain air. That faint sound, just a simple bell, the kind that had rung 1,000 times before, cracked something open inside him. In that instant, according to his own account, Hakuin experienced a flash of understanding so total, so overwhelming, that he wept and wailed with a joy he could not contain. He described the feeling as one of infinite space. Everything he thought he knew about himself, about the world, about the boundary between the two dissolved. That, in its rawest form, is Satori. And tonight, we are going to explore it from every angle. We are going to travel back thousands of years to the moment. The historical Buddha sat beneath a fig tree in India and experienced the original awakening that would birth an entire spiritual tradition. We will follow that tradition as it moved from India into China, carried by a bearded monk who, legend says, sat facing a cave wall for 9 years without speaking a word. We will meet illiterate woodcutters who became spiritual masters, fierce teachers who slapped and shouted their students into understanding, and quiet, gentle practitioners who believed that simply sitting, just sitting, nothing more, was itself the expression of enlightenment. We will examine the strange, paradoxical riddles called koans that Zen masters have used for centuries to short-circuit the rational mind. We will look at what modern neuroscience has discovered about the meditating brain, and we will ask the question that lies at the very heart of Zen Buddhism. Can a single moment of insight truly change the way a person sees the world? Forever. So settle in. Get comfortable. Let your breathing slow down a little. This is going to be a long, winding, deeply immersive journey. And like all good Zen journeys, the destination might just turn out to be the place you were standing all along. Let us begin with the word itself. Satori. The word derives from the Japanese verb satoru, which simply means to know or to understand. But this is not the kind of knowing you get from reading a textbook or memorizing a formula. This is something entirely different. The kind of understanding that Satori points to is not intellectual. It is not something you arrive at through reason, through logic, through careful analysis. In fact, according to virtually every Zen teacher who has ever spoken about it, Satori is what happens when the thinking mind finally gives up, when it exhausts itself completely, when it stops trying to figure things out, and in that gap, in that sudden absence of mental noise, something else rushes in. Something that was apparently there all along, hidden underneath the constant chatter. The great Japanese scholar D.T. Suzuki, who spent much of the 20th century introducing Zen Buddhism to the Western world, described Satori as acquiring a new point of view in our dealings with life and the world. He called it the very reason for Zen's existence. Without Satori, he said bluntly, Zen is not Zen. And he meant it. For Suzuki, every teaching, every practice, every demanding exercise within the Zen tradition existed for one purpose, only to bring a person to the threshold of Satori, and with any luck, push them through it. Now, it is important to say right at the outset that the word Satori is often used interchangeably with another Japanese term, kensho. Kensho literally means seeing into one's true nature. Ken means seeing. Sho means nature or essence. And while the two words point to the same basic experience, there is a subtle distinction that many Zen teachers make. Kensho is typically used to describe a first glimpse, an initial, brief flash of awakening. It might last only a few seconds. It might fade quickly, but it is real, and it changes something in the person who experiences it. Satori, on the other hand, is sometimes reserved for a deeper, more complete experience of enlightenment, something closer to the full awakening that the historical Buddha is said to have achieved. And then there is a third term, daigo-tere, which refers to a lasting, thoroughgoing realization, the kind that permeates every aspect of a person's life and does not retreat. But well, here is the thing that makes all of this so difficult to talk about. Every single Zen teacher who has ever tried to describe Satori has eventually thrown up their hands and admitted that words cannot capture it. The Britannica Encyclopedia describes Satori as unexplainable, indescribable, and unintelligible by reason and logic. And this is not some kind of mystical evasion. It is a genuine acknowledgement that the experience exists in a dimension that language was never designed to reach. Language is built on duality, on the distinction between this and that, between subject and object, between the one who speaks and the thing being spoken about. Satori, according to those who have experienced it, is precisely the moment when those distinctions collapse, when the barrier between self and world becomes, for a moment at least, transparent. So how do you talk about something that, by its very nature, resists being talked about? Well, you tell stories. You use metaphors. You point at the moon and hope the listener does not get too fixated on your finger. That is, in many ways, the entire project of Zen Buddhism. And it all began with one man, sitting under one tree, on one very particular night in India, roughly 250 years ago. The story of the Buddha's enlightenment is the origin point, the seed from which everything we are exploring tonight eventually grew. And while the details have been told and retold, embellished and debated across dozens of cultures and centuries, the core of the story remains remarkably consistent. His name was Siddhartha Gautama. He was born around the 5th or 6th century BCE in what is present-day Nepal, into a royal family of considerable wealth and privilege. His father, King Suddhodana, wanted to shield his son from the suffering of the outside world. Siddhartha grew up surrounded by beauty, comfort, and luxury. He had servants, fine food, and a palace designed to keep the uglier parts of human existence far from his sight. But the walls of a palace, no matter how high, cannot keep out the truth forever. According to the traditional accounts, the young prince eventually ventured outside and encountered what are known as the Four Sights, an old man a sick person, a corpse being carried to a funeral, and a wandering holy man who had renounced worldly life. These encounters shattered the illusion of the sheltered world his father had built for him. For the first time, Siddhartha confronted the reality that every human being ages, gets sick, and dies. And this realization did not sit politely in the background of his mind. It consumed him. At the age of 29, Siddhartha made a decision that would change the course of human history. He left his palace, his wife, and his newborn son. He abandoned his inheritance, his name, his position. He shaved his head, put on the simple robes of a wandering ascetic, and set out to find the answer to a single question: is there a way out of suffering? For 6 years, he searched. He studied with the most renowned meditation teachers of his time. He practiced extreme asceticism, fasting until his spine could be felt through his stomach, denying himself sleep, pushing his body to the very edge of death. And while these practices taught him discipline and concentration, they did not give him the answer he was looking for. None of them led to the liberation he sought. Eventually, Siddhartha realized that the extreme path of self-denial was just as much of a dead end as the extreme path of self-indulgence. He recalled a moment from his childhood, a time when, sitting alone beneath a tree during a festival, he had naturally fallen into a state of calm, focused awareness. Simple, unforced, he decided to return to that kind of natural meditation. He found a place called Uruvela, what we now call Bodh Gaya, in the Indian state of Bihar. He sat down beneath a large fig tree, a species known botanically as Ficus religiosa, and he made a vow. He would not rise from that spot until he had found the truth. What happened next, according to the traditional Buddhist accounts, unfolded over the course of a single night, and that night is divided into 3 phases, known as the 3 watches. During the first watch of the night, Siddhartha entered a deep meditative state and gained the ability to recall his past lives. He saw himself moving through countless existences, birth after birth, death after death, caught in the endless wheel of becoming. This was not an intellectual understanding. It was an experiential one. He felt the weight of it, the exhaustion of it, the futility of an existence driven by craving and ignorance. During the second watch, his perception deepened further. He gained what is sometimes called the divine eye, the ability to perceive the arising and passing away of all beings according to their actions, their intentions, their attachments. He saw how the cycle of suffering perpetuated itself, how beings created their own imprisonment through the mechanism of desire. And then, during the third watch, as the night was giving way to dawn, Siddhartha penetrated to the deepest layer of understanding. He saw the 4 noble truths with complete clarity: that suffering exists, that it arises from craving, that it can cease, and that there is a path leading to its cessation. With this realization, the last traces of delusion fell away. The chains of ignorance snapped. And as the morning star appeared in the sky, Siddhartha Gautama was no longer Siddhartha Gautama. He was the Buddha, the awakened one. In his own words, as recorded in the early Buddhist texts, my heart, thus knowing, thus seeing, was released from the fermentation of sensuality, released from the fermentation of becoming, released from the fermentation of ignorance. With release, there was the knowledge, released. I discerned that birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task done. That tree beneath which he sat became known as the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening, and the experience itself, that complete, unshakable seeing into the nature of reality, is what the Zen tradition would eventually call Satori. Now, it is worth pausing here for a moment, because this story is not just a piece of ancient history. It is the foundation upon which the entire Zen tradition rests. Every monastery bell that rings at dawn, every monk who sits in silence facing a wall, every koan that a teacher whispers to a student in a private interview room, all of it traces back to this single night beneath a fig tree. The Buddha's awakening was not the end of something. It was the beginning. It was the seed that would grow across centuries, across continents, through cultures and languages and climates, until it arrived, roughly 1,000 years later, in the hands of a bearded monk from the West, standing at the gates of China. The story of how the Buddha's awakening traveled from India to China is one of the most remarkable journeys in the history of human thought. And at its center stands one of the most mysterious and legendary figures in all of Buddhism, a man known as Bodhidharma. Now, let us be honest about something right away. Almost everything we know about Bodhidharma is wrapped in legend. The historical records are sparse and often contradictory. Some sources say he was from South India, the third son of a great king. Others describe him as a Persian Central Asian. One account claims he was 150 years old when he arrived in China. Another depicts him as much younger. What we can say with reasonable confidence is that Bodhidharma lived sometime during the 5th or 6th century CE, that he traveled to China, and that he is traditionally credited as the person who brought Chan Buddhism, the predecessor of Zen to Chinese soil. The most famous story about Bodhidharma involves his meeting with Emperor Wu of the Liang dynasty. Emperor Wu was a devoted Buddhist patron. He had built monasteries. He had commissioned copies of sacred texts. He had supported the ordination of countless monks. And so, when he learned that this renowned meditation master from the West had arrived in his territory, he eagerly arranged a meeting. The emperor asked Bodhidharma a straightforward question. "I have built temples, copied sutras, and ordained monks. How much merit have I earned?" Bodhidharma's answer was devastating in its simplicity. "None whatsoever," he said. The emperor, confused and perhaps a little offended, pressed on. "What then is the highest meaning of noble truth?" "There is no noble truth," Bodhidharma replied. "There is only emptiness." The emperor tried once more. "Then who is standing before me?" "I do not know," Bodhidharma said. And with that, the conversation was over. This exchange became so well known that it was later included as the very first case in the Blue Cliff Record, one of the most important collections of koans in the Zen tradition. The story illustrates something fundamental about the kind of awakening that Bodhidharma represented. The emperor was operating within a framework of spiritual accounting. Do good deeds, accumulate merit, get closer to enlightenment. It is a perfectly reasonable approach, and in many Buddhist traditions, it is valued highly. But Bodhidharma was pointing at something else entirely. He was saying, true awakening has nothing to do with keeping score. It is not a reward for good behavior. It is a direct seeing into the nature of things, right here, right now, without any intermediary. After his encounter with the emperor, according to the traditional accounts, Bodhidharma traveled north to the Shaolin Monastery on Mount Song, and there, the stories tell us, he sat facing the wall of a cave for 9 years, without speaking, without moving, just sitting, gazing at stone. This image, the bearded monk, motionless before a blank wall, became one of the most powerful symbols in all of Chan and Zen Buddhism. It represents something that is almost impossible for the modern mind to comprehend: the willingness to sit with absolutely nothing. No entertainment, no distraction, no goal, no project, no agenda, just raw, unfiltered awareness, meeting the bare surface of a wall, day after day, season after season, year after year. And this practice, this wall gazing, or biguan as it is called in Chinese, was not just a personal quirk of Bodhidharma's. It became the foundation of Chan meditation. The core teaching that Bodhidharma brought to China can be summarized in 4 lines that are often attributed to him. Though scholars debate their exact origin, a special transmission outside the scriptures. No reliance on words and letters, pointing directly to the human mind, seeing one's nature and becoming Buddha. These 4 lines are, in many ways, the mission statement of Zen. They say, the truth that the Buddha discovered cannot be found in books. It cannot be transmitted through language or doctrine. It can only be experienced directly. And the way to experience it is to look inward, to see your own nature clearly, without the fog of concepts and ideas. When you do that, you discover that you already are what you have been seeking. You are already Buddha. You just did not know it. After Bodhidharma, the lineage continued. One of the most famous stories from this early period involves Bodhidharma's successor, a monk named Hakuin. According to legend, Hakuin came to Bodhidharma's cave in the dead of winter. Desperate for instruction, Bodhidharma refused to acknowledge him. Hakuin stood outside in the snow all night. By morning, the snow had piled up to his waist. Still, Bodhidharma did not turn from the wall. In an act of almost incomprehensible determination, Hakuin cut off his own arm and presented it to Bodhidharma as proof of his sincerity. Only then did the master turn and ask, "What do you seek?" Hakuin said, "My mind is in anguish. Please pacify it." Bodhidharma replied, "Bring me your mind and I will pacify it." Hakuin searched and searched, but could not find his mind anywhere. Finally, he admitted, "I cannot find it." "There," said Bodhidharma, "I have pacified your mind." At that moment, according to the story, Hakuin experienced awakening. And this exchange, deceptively simple on the surface, impossibly deep below it, captures the essential flavor of what Satori looks like in the Chan and Zen tradition. The mind cannot grasp the mind. The moment you stop trying to grab hold of it, the anguish evaporates. What remains is clarity. The lineage that began with Bodhidharma passed through 5 successive patriarchs, each one transmitting the teaching to the next. But it was the 6th patriarch, a figure named Hakuin, who would radically reshape Chan Buddhism and give rise to the concept of sudden enlightenment that lies at the very heart of Satori. The story of Hakuin is one of the most beloved tales in all of Zen literature. And it begins in the most unlikely of places, not in a monastery, not in a wealthy family, but in the dirt-poor countryside of southern China. Hakuin was born around 638 CE. His father died when he was young, and his mother was destitute. The boy received no formal education. He could not read, he could not write. He made a meager living selling firewood. By every measure of his society, he was a nobody, an illiterate peasant from the provinces, the kind of person that scholars and monks would never think to look at twice. And yet, one day, while delivering firewood to a shop, Hakuin overheard someone reciting a line from the Diamond Sutra, one of the most revered texts in Mahayana Buddhism. The line was, "One should activate one's mind so it has no attachment." And according to the traditional account, in that very instant, hearing those words for the first time, Hakuin experienced a flash of awakening. Think about that for a moment. An illiterate woodcutter, hearing a single sentence he had never encountered before, experiences a sudden insight into the nature of reality. Not after years of study, not after decades of meditation, but right there in a shop with bundles of firewood on his back. This is the radical promise at the heart of Chan Buddhism. That awakening is not reserved for the educated elite, not dependent on years of formal practice, not something you earn through effort and accumulation. It is available to anyone, anywhere, at any time. Because it is not something foreign that must be imported into your mind. It is something that is already there, your own original nature, waiting to be seen. Inspired by this experience, Hakuin traveled roughly 500 miles to find the fifth patriarch, a master named Hongren, who was teaching the Diamond Sutra at a monastery in the north. When Hakuin arrived and told the patriarch he had come seeking Buddhahood, Hongren reportedly said, "You are from the south. You are a barbarian. How can you become a Buddha?" Hakuin's response was remarkable for its directness. Although people come from the south and the north, there is neither south nor north in Buddha nature. Hongren recognized something in the young man, but kept it to himself. He assigned Hakuin to the rice-pounding room, the lowest, most menial job in the entire monastery, where he worked for 8 months, unseen and unnoticed by the other monks. Then came the turning point. Hongren announced that he would pass his robe and his teaching to whichever student could demonstrate true understanding by writing a poem. The senior monk, Shanxiu, a highly respected and deeply learned man, wrote his verse on a wall in the corridor. The body is the tree of enlightenment. The mind is like a bright mirror stand. Time after time, polish it diligently so that no dust can collect. This poem expressed a sincere and dedicated approach to practice, the idea that the mind is inherently pure, but must be constantly cleaned and maintained through disciplined effort. It is a beautiful sentiment, and most of the monks were deeply impressed. But Hakuin, unable to write the poem himself, asked a low-ranking official to inscribe his response on the wall. Enlightenment is not a tree. The bright mirror has no stand. Originally, there is not one thing. What place could there be for dust? The difference between these two poems is, in a very real sense, the difference between two entire schools of Buddhist thought. Shanxiu's poem says, "Your mind is basically pure, but you need to keep working at it, keep polishing, keep removing the defilements that accumulate over time." It is a gradual approach, patient, disciplined, methodical. Hakuin's poem says, "Wait a moment. There is nothing to polish. There is no dust. There is no mirror. The very idea that you need to improve yourself, that you need to achieve something you do not already have, is itself the fundamental misunderstanding. Your original nature is already complete, already perfect, already awake. You just need to see it. The fifth patriarch recognized the depth of Huineng's understanding, but knowing that the other monks would be jealous and potentially dangerous, he met with Huineng secretly. Late at night, he explained the Diamond Sutra to the young man in private. And when Huineng heard the phrase, "One should activate one's mind so it has no attachment," he was, according to the account, suddenly and completely enlightened. He realized that all things exist in self-nature. Hongren then transmitted the Dharma to Huineng, the robe and bowl that symbolized the patriarchal succession, and told him to flee south under cover of darkness, because the other monks would surely come after him. And so the illiterate firewood seller from the provinces became the sixth patriarch of Chan Buddhism, the founder of the Southern School of Sudden Enlightenment, and arguably the single most influential figure in the history of Zen after the Buddha himself. Huineng went on to teach for nearly 4 decades. His teachings were recorded by his students and compiled into what is known as the Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch, the only Chinese Buddhist text given the honored title of Sutra, a designation normally reserved for the words of the Buddha. In the Platform Sutra, Huineng hammered home the point again and again. All people possess the Buddha nature. Awakening is not something you build through gradual accumulation. It is something you see directly in a flash when the conditions are right. He once said, "Good friends, in the Dharma there is no sudden or gradual, but among people some are keen and others dull." In other words, the truth itself is neither sudden nor gradual, it simply is, but people differ in how quickly they can see it. Some need years of preparation. Some need only a single word. And one of the most famous koans attributed to Huineng comes from his encounter with a pursuing monk named Huiming, who had been sent to retrieve the patriarch's robe. When Huiming caught up to him on a mountaintop, Huineng turned and said, "Not thinking of good, not thinking of evil, just at this moment, what was your original face before your mother and father were born?" In that instant, Huiming was enlightened, and this koan, "What is your original face?" is still one of the first koans given to beginning students in Japanese Zen monasteries today. Now, having traveled through the historical origins, from the Buddha under the Bodhi tree, through Bodhidharma's wall-gazing cave, to Huineng's midnight transmission, we arrive at what might be the most important question in all of this. What does Satori actually feel like? What happens in those moments when, as Zen teachers describe it, the bottom falls out of the bucket? This is, as we have already noted, notoriously difficult to put into words. But D.T. Suzuki, who probably did more than any single person to bring Zen to Western audiences, spent years attempting to articulate the chief characteristics of the Satori experience, and his descriptions, while they cannot replace the experience itself, offer us something like a map of the territory. The first characteristic Suzuki identified is irrationality. Satori, he says, has nothing to do with intellectual reasoning. It does not arrive through logic. It cannot be deduced from premises. You cannot think your way into it. In fact, thinking is precisely the obstacle that must be overcome. When Satori strikes, it often feels like something that makes no logical sense. And yet, At the same time, it carries a certainty so deep that no amount of rational argument could ever shake it. It is a knowing that exists below, or perhaps beyond the level of thought. The second characteristic is intuitive insight. Suzuki describes this as a kind of metaphysical perception, a seeing into the very fabric of reality that bypasses the ordinary channels of sense experience and intellectual analysis. It is not that you learn new facts about the world. It is that the world itself appears radically different. The same mountains, the same rivers, the same cup of tea in your hand, but everything is somehow transformed. Or, more accurately, you realize that nothing has actually changed. You have simply dropped the filter through which you were viewing it. There is a famous Zen saying that captures this perfectly. Before enlightenment, mountains are mountains and waters are waters. During the study of Zen, mountains are no longer mountains and waters are no longer waters. After enlightenment, mountains are once again mountains and waters are once again waters. The landscape has not moved. You have. The third characteristic is authoritativeness. When Satori comes, it comes with an unshakable sense of finality. You do not wonder whether it is real. You do not need to ask anyone else to confirm it. It carries its own proof. Suzuki was very emphatic about this. No amount of subsequent logical reasoning can override the authority of the experience itself. You might not be able to explain it. You might not be able to defend it in a philosophical debate, but you know. And that knowing is absolute. The fourth characteristic is affirmation. This might seem counterintuitive, given that so much of Buddhist philosophy deals with negation, the emptiness of the self, the dissolution of fixed concepts, the letting go of attachments. But Satori, according to Suzuki, is not a negating experience. It is profoundly affirmative. It says yes to existence. It does not withdraw from the world. It embraces it completely, with all its beauty and all its pain. The Zen master who has experienced Satori does not float above reality. They walk into it more fully than ever before. The fifth characteristic Suzuki describes is a sense of the beyond. During the experience of Satori, there is a feeling of expansion, as if you are no longer contained within the boundaries of your physical body. The edges dissolve. The sense of being a separate, isolated self loosens, and in its place arises a feeling of connection that words like vast or infinite only begin to approximate. The old Zen teachers sometimes described this as the feeling of infinite space, a boundless openness in which there is room for everything. The sixth characteristic is an impersonal tone. Satori is not about you, the individual, the ego, the personal identity. In fact, the very sense of I that normally stands at the center of experience is precisely what falls away. What remains after the I dissolves is not nothingness. It is a kind of awareness without a center, universal, spacious, and utterly free from the anxiety that comes with trying to maintain and protect a separate self. This is why Suzuki says the experience has an impersonal quality. It is not that your personality disappears forever. You still remember your name, your history, your relationships, but you recognize, perhaps for the first time, that these things are not the deepest truth about you. The seventh characteristic is a feeling of exaltation. People who experience Satori often describe overwhelming joy, a sense of liberation so profound that laughter or tears, sometimes both, come spontaneously. The Zen teacher Alan Watts once said, with characteristic playfulness, "Like they say in Zen, when you attain Satori, nothing is left for you in that moment other than to have a good laugh." And this laughter is not the laughter of amusement. It is the laughter of release, of finally putting down a burden you had been carrying so long you forgot it was there. And the eighth characteristic, well, this one is interesting. It is momentary. Satori is sudden. It arrives without warning, like a thunderclap under a clear blue sky. To use the image from a famous Enlightenment poem by the 13th century Chinese master woman Hakuin, it does not build gradually. It does not creep in through the side door. It strikes. And while its effects may last a lifetime, the experience itself is often brief. A flash, a crack in the surface of ordinary perception. If it is not abrupt and momentary, it is not Satori, Suzuki wrote with characteristic directness. Now, it is important to add a caveat here. These 8 characteristics are Suzuki's framework, and while it is an enormously useful one, it represents just one way of describing something that, by definition, resists description. Other teachers have emphasized different aspects. Some have downplayed the dramatic, lightning bolt quality and stressed instead the quiet, almost unremarkable nature of genuine insight. Nothing special, as the great Shunryu Suzuki, no relation to DT, like to say. But what nearly all Zen teachers agree on is this: Satori involves a radical shift in perspective, not a change in what you see, but a change in how you see. And once that shift occurs, even briefly, the world, while remaining exactly the same, is never quite the same again. There is another dimension of Satori that deserves attention, and it has to do with what might be called the dissolution of duality. In our ordinary state of consciousness, we experience the world in pairs of opposites, self and other, subject and object, inside and outside, good and bad. These categories feel so natural, so self-evident, that we rarely question them. They seem to be built into the structure of reality itself. But Satori, according to the Zen tradition, reveals that these dualities are not inherent in reality. They are constructions of the mind. Useful constructions, to be sure. We could not navigate daily life without them. But ultimately, they are like a lens that colors everything we see without realizing it. When that lens is temporarily removed, when, for a moment, the mind stops drawing its habitual lines between this and that, what appears is a seamless, undivided reality. Not a blank void, not an absence, but a fullness so complete that it contains all the apparent opposites within itself, without contradiction. This is what the old masters meant when they talked about non-duality. And it is why Satori is so often described as a kind of homecoming, a return to something you never actually left. Satori is dropping the false, entering into the real, one teacher put it. Just being your ordinary self, your true nature. Of all the tools that the Zen tradition has developed to bring practitioners to the threshold of Satori, none is more famous or more mysterious than the koan. A koan, the word, is the Japanese pronunciation of the Chinese gongen, which originally meant a public case or legal precedent, is a short story, a question, a dialogue, or a statement drawn from the records of the great Chinese Chan masters of the Tang and Song dynasties. and at first glance, most koans appear to be utterly nonsensical. A monk asks his teacher, "What is Buddha?" The teacher replies, 3 pounds of flax." A student asks, "Does a dog have Buddha nature?" The master says, "Mu," a word that roughly translates as not or nothing. A teacher holds up his hand and asks, "You know the sound of 2 hands clapping. Now tell me, what is the sound of 1 hand?" To the rational mind, these exchanges are baffling. They seem like gibberish, or at best, like riddles with no answers. And in a sense, that is exactly the point. You see, the koan is not a puzzle to be solved through intellectual analysis. The effort to solve a koan is precisely the mechanism through which it does its work. The Britannica Encyclopedia defines a koan as a succinct paradoxical statement or question used as a meditation discipline for novices, particularly in the Rinzai sect. The effort to solve a koan is intended to exhaust the analytic intellect and the egoistic will, readying the mind to entertain an appropriate response on the intuitive level. That last part is crucial, readying the mind to entertain an appropriate response on the intuitive level. The koan does not give you an answer. It destroys the part of you that thinks answers are the point. It is a stick of dynamite placed carefully at the foundation of your rational mind. And when it goes off, something new can emerge from the rubble. The most famous koan in the entire Zen tradition is probably the Mu koan, also known as Jeju's dog. It appears as the very first case in the Mumonkan, or Gateless Gate, a collection of 48 koans compiled by the Chinese master Wumen Huikai in the early 13th century. Here it is in its entirety. A monk asked Jeju, "Does a dog have Buddha nature?" Jeju answered, "Mu, that is it." The whole thing, a few dozen words. And yet, this tiny exchange has occupied the minds of Zen practitioners for over 800 years. Wumen himself struggled with it for 6 years before attaining his breakthrough. 6 years, sitting with a single syllable, day after day, month after month, until one morning, upon hearing the drum that announced mealtimes, his mind cracked open and the realization flooded in. He wrote a poem about it afterward, a thunderclap under the clear blue sky. All beings on earth open their eyes. Everything under heaven bows together. Mount Sumeru leaps up and dances in traditional koan practice, which is especially central to the Rinzai school of Zen. A teacher assigns a koan to a student during a private interview. The student then meditates on the koan, not analyzes it, not thinks about it, but meditates on it, bringing the koan into the very center of their consciousness and holding it there during zazen. Periodically, the student returns to the teacher for another interview, where they present their understanding. If the teacher feels the student has not yet penetrated the koan's meaning, they are sent back to continue sitting with it. This process can take weeks, months, or years. The key to working with a koan, according to virtually every teacher who has written about it, is what is called the Great Doubt. The Rinzai master Hakuin Ekaku put it memorably, "At the bottom of great doubt lies great awakening. If you doubt fully, you will awaken fully." The doubt he is describing is not intellectual skepticism. It is existential doubt, a wholesale questioning of everything you think you know about yourself and the world. The koan creates a kind of internal pressure, a spiritual tension that builds and builds until it reaches a breaking point. And at that breaking point, if the conditions are right, Satori may occur. Now, well, let us look at a few more koans to get a feel for their strange, playful, sometimes aggressive energy. The most famous koan attributed to Hakuin himself is, "You know the sound of two hands clapping. Now tell me, what is the sound of one hand?" This is often misquoted as "what is the sound of one hand clapping?" But Hakuin's original phrasing is slightly different, and the difference matters. Hakuin was not asking about a physical impossibility. He was asking about non-duality. Two hands represent the world of opposites, subject and object, self and other. One hand represents the reality before those distinctions arise. What is that reality? What is the sound of existence before the mind splits it into two? Then there is the koan. What was your original face before your mother and father were born? This is attributed to Huineng, the sixth patriarch, and it pushes the practitioner to look past everything they have accumulated in this life: their name, their personality, their history, their body, their thoughts, and to ask, who were you before all of this? What is the awareness that exists prior to identity? Or consider this exchange. A monk asked Joshu, "Please instruct me in Zen." Joshu replied, "Have you eaten your breakfast?" "Yes," said the monk. "Then go wash your bowl." On the surface, this sounds like a dismissal, but within the Zen tradition, it is revered as a profound teaching. Joshu is saying, Zen is not somewhere else. It is not in the special, the extraordinary, the elevated. It is right here in the most ordinary activities of daily life. Eating breakfast, washing your bowl, walking to the door. If you are looking for enlightenment somewhere outside of this moment, you have already missed it. There are between 17-0 and 18-0 traditional koans in the major collections: the Gateless Gate, the Blue Cliff Record, the Book of Serenity, and others. In the Rinzai school, students work through a carefully structured curriculum of these koans over the course of many years. Each koan is accompanied by checking questions, subsidiary questions that test the depth and authenticity of the student's understanding. For the Mu koan alone, there are between 20 and 100 checking questions, depending on the teaching lineage. But the goal of koan practice is not to memorize correct answers. The answers are not fixed in that way. What the teacher is looking for in each interview is evidence of genuine insight, a living response that arises from the student's own direct experience, not from something they read in a book or heard in a talk. The student must embody the koan. They must become the koan. As one teacher put it, the monk he is seeking is the koan. Realization of this is the insight. We have already met Hakuin Ekaku briefly, the young monk whose enlightenment, triggered by the sound of a distant temple bell, brought him to tears. But Hakuin's story is far richer and more complex than that single moment suggests. And his contributions to the Zen tradition are so enormous that it is no exaggeration to say, without Hakuin, the Rinzai school of Zen as it exists today would not exist at all. Hakuin was born in 1686 in Hara, a small village at the base of Mount Fuji in what is now Shizuoka Prefecture. As a boy of about 8 years old, he heard a fire and brimstone sermon about the torments of the Buddhist hell realms. The description of these hells, endless cycles of burning, freezing, being torn apart and reassembled only to be torn apart again, terrified the young Hakuin so deeply that he became obsessed with finding a way to escape them. At the age of 15, he entered the monastery of Shoinji in his hometown and took ordination as a Rinzai monk. But life in the temple did not immediately provide the answers he was looking for. As a young man, Hakuin traveled from monastery to monastery, studying under various teachers, searching for something that kept eluding him. Then, in the winter of 1708, when Hakuin was just 23 years old, Mount Fuji erupted with tremendous force. Earthquakes shook the temple where he was staying. The other monks fled, but Hakuin remained in the meditation hall, sitting in zazen as the building trembled around him. He told himself, "If I am going to awaken, the Buddhas will protect me. If not, then let the building fall." He survived the eruption, and the following year, at a different temple, came the breakthrough. For 2 weeks, he sat zazen through the nights, barely sleeping. Then one morning, at the break of dawn, a distant temple bell rang. That simple, everyday sound rang through him like a thunderclap. In his own account, the realization flooded his entire being. He felt as though his hands were holding the whole sky. He wept with a joy that shook his body. And then, here is where Hakuin's story takes an instructive turn. He got proud. Very, very proud. He was convinced that no one in 300 years had experienced such a powerful realization. He went to see a highly regarded Rinzai teacher named Shaju Rajan, also known as Dakyu Etten, to share the good news. Shaju was not impressed. In fact, he was deliberately, provocatively unimpressed. When Hakuin presented his understanding, Shaju called him a self-centered rascal and subjected him to relentless verbal and physical challenges. He assigned Hakuin the most difficult koans. He berated him. He grabbed his nose and twisted it. He pushed Hakuin off a porch into a mud ditch. This treatment, harsh as it sounds, was not cruel. It was medicine. Shaju could see that Hakuin had indeed experienced a genuine awakening, but it was incomplete. The ego had crept back in and was now wearing the experience like a badge of honor, and an ego wearing spiritual attainment like a medal is, in many ways, more dangerous than an ego that has never tasted awakening at all. Hakuin studied under Shaju for about 8 months. During that time, he experienced 3 more isolated moments of Satori. But it was not until many years later, at the age of 42, sitting in Shoinji Temple, the very place where he had first been ordained, that Hakuin experienced what he described as his final, definitive awakening. According to his account, he was reading the Lotus Sutra when he heard a cricket chirping in the garden. In that sound, the last of his doubts dissolved. He wailed and wept once more. And this time, the realization was different. This time, it was not about personal spiritual achievement. What Hakuin finally understood deeply, cellularly, in a way that permeated every fiber of his being, was that the true purpose of awakening is not to escape the world. It is to serve it. What is to be valued above all else, Hakuin wrote, is the practice that comes after Satori is achieved. And what is that practice? It is the practice that puts the mind of enlightenment first and foremost. The mind of enlightenment, for Hakuin, meant one thing: benefiting others, sharing the Dharma, alleviating suffering wherever you find it. Hakuin spent the remaining decades of his life teaching at Shoinji and transforming the Rinzai school from the ground up. By his time, Rinzai Zen had fallen into decline. Many temples had become politically connected institutions, focused more on ceremony and social status than on genuine awakening. Hakuin stripped all of that away and restored the practice to its essentials. Sit, face your doubt, work the koan, break through. He also created new koans, the most famous of which is the one we have already discussed. What is the sound of one hand? He invented it in 1748, partly because he found that many of his students were struggling with the traditional mu koan, and he wanted an alternative entry point that would be equally effective at shattering conceptual thinking. Hakuin systematized koan study in a way that had never been done before, arranging the traditional koans into a curriculum of increasing difficulty, and establishing a rigorous interview process in which students demonstrated their understanding to the teacher. This system, refined by his students and successors, remains the backbone of Rinzai Zen training to this day. Every modern Rinzai master traces their lineage back through Hakuin. Everyone. He also emphasized what he called the three essentials of Zazen practice: great faith, great doubt, and great resolve. Great faith means trusting that your own nature is already Buddha nature, even when you cannot see it. Great doubt means allowing the koan to generate a deep, all-consuming questioning that takes over your entire consciousness. And great resolve means the determination to keep going, no matter how long it takes, no matter how painful the process becomes. And beyond his teaching and his reforms, Hakuin was also an extraordinary artist. He took up painting late in life, at around age 60, and became one of the greatest Zen painters in Japanese history. His bold, energetic ink brush images of Bodhidharma, on the one hand, of monks and mountains and calligraphic characters, were not just art. They were Dharma teachings in visual form, what he called visual sermons. He painted for the common people, many of whom could not read, and his works carried the essence of Zen into the lives of ordinary farmers, merchants, and townspeople who would never set foot in a monastery. Hakuin died in 1769 at the age of 83 in the same village where he had been born. His life, taken as a whole, is a testament to the Zen teaching that Satori is not a destination. It is not a trophy. It is the beginning of a new way of living, one characterized by compassion, by service, by the relentless determination to awaken, not just for yourself, but for the benefit of every single being. If Satori is the flash of lightning, then Zazen, sitting meditation, is the sky that makes lightning possible. Without Zazen, there is no Zen. The two words even share the same root. Zen is the Japanese pronunciation of the Chinese word Chan, which itself comes from the Sanskrit dhyana, meaning meditation. At its most basic level, Zen Buddhism is a meditation tradition, and Zazen is the form that meditation takes. The practice is deceptively simple to describe. You find a quiet room, you sit down, you cross your legs in full lotus if you are flexible enough, half lotus if you are not, or kneeling, or even in a chair. You sit on a round cushion called a zafu, which is placed on a flat mat called a zabuton. You straighten your spine so that it rises naturally, without slumping or straining. Your head is upright, your chin slightly tucked. You lower your gaze to a spot on the floor about 3 or 4 feet in front of you, eyes half open. not focused on anything in particular. Your hands form what is called the cosmic mudra, the right hand palm up in your lap, the left hand resting on top of it, also palm up, with the tips of your thumbs lightly touching, forming a small oval shape. This hand position is more than decorative. If your mind wanders, the oval tends to collapse. Your thumbs droop apart or press together too firmly. The mudra becomes a subtle feedback system, a mirror of your mental state. You breathe through your nose naturally, without forcing the breath into any particular pattern. In some traditions, beginners are taught to count their breaths, 1 on the inhale, 2 on the exhale, up to 10. Then start over. If you lose count, you begin again at 1. No judgment, no frustration, just begin again. And that is basically it. You sit, you breathe, you stay present. When a thought arises, and thoughts will arise endlessly, relentlessly, you do not chase it and you do not fight it. You simply notice it and let it go. Like a cloud passing through an open sky, like a leaf floating by on a river. You do not grab the leaf. You do not try to stop the river. You just watch. This, well, sounds easy enough, but anyone who has ever tried it knows that it is one of the hardest things a human being can do. Within the first 30 seconds, the mind rebels. It wants to think. It wants to plan. It wants to replay conversations from yesterday and worry about meetings tomorrow. It wants to itch, to fidget, to shift position, to open its eyes and check the clock. The noise is relentless, and in the beginning, sitting with that noise can feel absolutely unbearable. But here is the thing about Zazen. You are not trying to stop the noise. That is one of the most common and most damaging misconceptions about meditation. The idea that the goal is to achieve a blank, thought-free mind. In the Soto Zen tradition, the great master Dogen Zenji put it this way: sitting fixedly, think of not thinking. How do you think of not thinking? Non-thinking. This is the art of Zazen. Non-thinking is not the absence of thought. It is a state of awareness that is larger than thought, a spaciousness in which thoughts can arise and dissolve without pulling you off center. You are not meditating against your thoughts. You are meditating with them, including them, but not being ruled by them. In the Rinzai tradition, Zazen often takes a more focused form. After initial breath-counting practice, the student is typically given a koan to work with. They bring the koan into their meditation, holding it in the center of their awareness, not analyzing it, not thinking about it, but saturating their consciousness with it. The koan becomes the object of meditation, and the practitioner sits with it until the great doubt builds to a breaking point. In the Soto tradition, the primary form of Zazen is shikantaza, a Japanese word that translates roughly as nothing but precisely sitting, or just sitting. In shikantaza, there is no object of meditation, no koan, no mantra, no breath counting. You simply sit with complete awareness, open to whatever arises, thoughts, sounds, sensations, emotions, without attaching to any of it or pushing any of it away. Shikantaza is often described as the most challenging form of meditation, precisely because it gives the mind absolutely nothing to hold on to. The 13th century Master Dogen, who founded the Japanese Soto school, described Zazen not as a technique for achieving enlightenment, but as the expression of enlightenment itself. Zazen is not step-by-step meditation, he wrote. Rather, it is simply the easy and pleasant practice of a Buddha, the realization of the Buddha's wisdom. The truth appears, there being no delusion. For Dojin, sitting in Zazen was not a means to an end, it was the end itself. Or, more precisely, it dissolved the very distinction between means and ends. In Zen monasteries, Zazen is practiced in a meditation hall called a zendo. The room is spare, clean, and quiet. Practitioners sit in rows, facing the wall in the Soto tradition, or facing each other across the room in the Rinza tradition. A bell rings 3 times to mark the beginning of a sitting period, which typically lasts 25 to 40 minutes. During the sitting, a senior monk walks slowly up and down the rows, carrying a flat wooden stick called a keisaku. If a practitioner's posture begins to slump, if they seem drowsy or distracted, they can request a sharp strike on the shoulder to restore alertness. The sound of the keisaku cracking against a meditator's back is one of the most distinctive sounds in all of Zen. Between periods of sitting, practitioners do kinhin, walking meditation. They stand up, form their hands into a specific position called shashu. The right hand folded into a fist, the left hand wrapped around it, held against the chest, and walk slowly around the zendo in a clockwise direction. Each step is taken in rhythm with the breath, one full breath per half step. The pace is glacial. The awareness that was cultivated in sitting is carried into movement. During intensive training periods known as sesshin, which can last anywhere from 1 to 7 days, practitioners sit zazen for 10 to 14 hours a day. They eat their meals in the zendo, in a ritualized form called oryoki that involves precise, choreographed movements of bowls, utensils, and clothes. They sleep for just a few hours. They do not speak, except during interviews with the teacher. The entire session is designed to create an environment of total immersion, a container of silence and stillness in which the conditions for awakening are maximized. And it is often during session, when the practitioner has been sitting for days, when the body aches and the mind is raw and exhausted, when every habitual defense and distraction has been stripped away. It is in that vulnerable, exposed state that Satori sometimes occurs. The doorway opens not when you are strong and armored. It opens when you are finally, completely willing to give up. In the deep states of Zazen, profound physical changes occur. Respiration slows dramatically from the normal resting rate of about 15 breaths per minute to as few as 2 or 3 breaths per minute. Heart rate decreases. Metabolism slows. The entire body enters a level of stillness that it does not reach even in deep sleep. And yet, paradoxically, awareness sharpens. The meditator is not drowsy or checked out. They are intensely, luminously present, more awake than they have ever been in their ordinary waking life. Modern neuroscience has begun to confirm what Zen practitioners have reported for centuries, that sustained meditation practice produces measurable changes in the brain. Studies using functional magnetic resonance imaging have shown that experienced meditators exhibit reduced activity in the default mode network, the brain regions associated with mind-wandering, self-referential thinking, and the constant inner monologue that most of us experience as normal consciousness. At the same time, meditators show increased connectivity in the areas associated with attention, emotional regulation, and what researchers call interoceptive awareness, the ability to perceive and interpret signals from within the body. But for the Zen practitioner, these scientific findings, while interesting, are somewhat beside the point. The purpose of Zazen is not to improve brain function, reduce stress, or enhance cognitive performance. Although all of these things may happen as side effects, the purpose of Zazen in the Zen tradition is far more radical than that. It is to realize the true nature of reality, to see through the illusion of a separate self, to wake up. But before we arrive at these modern findings, there is one more element of the Zen path that deserves sustained attention: the relationship between teacher and student. Because in Zen, Satori does not typically occur in isolation. It arises within a relationship. And that relationship between a living teacher and a living student, face to face, breath to breath, is considered absolutely irreplaceable. The Japanese word for the private interview between a Zen student and their teacher is dokusen in the Soto tradition and sanzen in the Rinza tradition. The format is intimate and ritualized. The student approaches the teacher's room, bows, enters, sits across from the teacher, and presents their understanding, whether of a koan of their practice or of whatever question is alive in their heart at that moment. The teacher listens, respond, sometimes with a word, sometimes with silence, sometimes with a question that sends the student back to the cushion for another week, another month, another year. This encounter is not a consultation. It is not therapy. It is not a philosophical discussion. It is more like a collision, two minds meeting in the most direct way possible, without the usual social cushioning, without polite evasions, without the comfortable distance that characterizes most human interactions. The teacher sees the student. I really see them. And in that seeing, the student's pretenses, their self-deceptions, their elaborate defenses, all of the ways they have been hiding from themselves, are exposed. The great Rinzai teacher, Shaju Rajan, under whom Hakuin studied, was famous for his brutal directness in these encounters. When Hakuin came to him bursting with pride after his first experience of Kensho, Shaju did not congratulate him. He grabbed Hakuin by the nose, twisted it, and said, "Tell me, what have you seen?" When Hakuin tried to explain his realization in words, Shaju dismissed it. When Hakuin quoted Zen texts, Shaju mocked him. The purpose of this harsh treatment was not cruelty. It was love, the fierce, uncompromising love of a teacher who would rather wound his student's pride than allow him to settle for a shallow understanding. Zen calls this kind of teaching grandmother mind in some contexts, the tender, watchful attention of a grandmother who wants nothing more than her grandchild's well-being. But Zen also has another mode. The roaring lion, the striking hawk, and a great Zen teacher moves between these modes fluidly, instinctively, responding to each student's unique needs in each moment. This is why the Zen tradition places such enormous emphasis on what is called Dharma transmission, the formal recognition by a teacher that a student has attained genuine understanding and is authorized to teach. Dharma transmission is not an academic degree. It is not a certification of competence. It is a living acknowledgement, passed from one human being to another, that the insight which began with the Buddha under the Bodhi tree continues, unbroken, in this student in this body, in this lifetime. The lineage charts of Zen Buddhism are remarkable documents. They trace an unbroken chain of transmission from the historical Buddha through Mahakashyapa, the disciple who understood when the Buddha silently held up a flower, through 28 Indian patriarchs, through Bodhidharma, through the Chinese masters, through Dogen and Hakuin and their heirs, all the way down to the teachers working today. Whether this chain is historically accurate in every detail is a matter of scholarly debate. But its symbolic significance is immense. It says, this teaching is alive. It is not a relic of the past. It is not words on a page. It lives in human beings, passed from hand to hand, from mind to mind, from heart to heart, across the centuries. Let us also spend a moment with the intensive retreat known as sesshin, because it is during sesshin that many of the most dramatic Satori experiences in the Zen literature are said to have occurred. The word sesshin literally means touching the mind or collecting the mind. It refers to an extended period of intensive meditation practice, typically lasting between 5 and 7 days, though shorter and longer variations exist. During sesshin, the ordinary rhythms of daily life are completely suspended. There is no talking, no reading, no writing, no phone calls, no email. The schedule is rigorous. Practitioners rise before dawn, often at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and begin sitting zazen. The day is structured around alternating periods of zazen and kinhin, walking meditation, punctuated by brief meals eaten in silence, work periods in which the grounds are tended without conversation, and short rest periods. In a rinzai session, the intensity is amplified further by daily private interviews with the teacher, during which the student presents their work on the koan they have been assigned. These interviews happen multiple times a day during session, sometimes as often as 4 or 5 times. The student approaches each interview with a mixture of dread and determination. They have been sitting for hours, their legs aching, their mind raw, and now they must face the teacher and show what they have found. If their response is not satisfactory, if it comes from the intellect rather than from genuine insight, the teacher will ring a bell, signaling the interview is over. The student bows and returns to the meditation hall to try again. The experience of sesshin is, by virtually all accounts, extraordinarily demanding. The first day or two are often characterized by physical discomfort, aching knees, stiff back, numb feet, and a mind that refuses to settle down. By the 3rd or 4th day, the practitioner has typically moved through the initial resistance and entered a deeper, quieter space. The sense of time begins to shift. Hours pass without being noticed. The boundaries between sitting and walking, between eating and meditating, begin to blur. Everything becomes practice. The whole world narrows to this breath, this step, this mouthful of rice, and it is in this state, this raw, stripped down, nowhere to hide state, that the mind sometimes cracks open. The accumulated pressure of sustained attention, combined with the exhaustion of trying to solve the unsolvable koan, combined with the absence of all the usual distractions and escapes, creates a kind of internal crucible. The ego, with nothing to feed on and nowhere to run, begins to loosen its grip. And when it does, when the seeker finally stops seeking, even for a moment, the sky appears where before there was only a ceiling. Not every session produces a Satori experience. Most do not. But the practice is not wasted even when no dramatic breakthrough occurs. Each period of session deepens the practitioner's stability, concentration, and capacity for presence. It wears away, slowly but steadily, the layers of habitual thinking and reactivity that obscure the natural clarity of the mind. It is like water wearing away stone, invisible in any single session, but transformative over the span of years and decades. There is also something to be said about the aesthetics of Zen. The way, the sensibility of awakening has expressed itself not only in meditation, practice, and philosophical discourse, but in art, architecture, gardening, calligraphy, tea ceremony, flower arrangement, and countless other forms of creative expression. The Zen aesthetic sensibility is characterized by qualities that the Japanese describe with words like wabi, rustic simplicity, sabai, the beauty of age and impermanence, and yujin, profound, mysterious grace. These are not decorative preferences. They are reflections of insight, of a way of seeing that finds beauty not in ornamentation and excess, but in simplicity, in the passage of time, in the imperfect, the incomplete, the weathered. Consider the Zen rock garden, a carefully raked expanse of white gravel, punctuated by a few carefully placed stones and perhaps a patch of moss. There are no flowers, no water features, no color, and yet, to a mind conditioned by Zen practice, the garden is not empty. It is full, brimming with space, with silence, with the invisible energy that connects stone to gravel to sky. The gaps between the stones are not absences, they are presences. They are the sound of one hand. Or consider the Japanese tea ceremony, which was deeply influenced by Zen. The ceremony is stripped of everything unnecessary. A small, rustic room, a single flower in a simple vase, a clay bowl, handmade, imperfect, with a glaze that shows the marks of the kiln's fire. Hot water, powdered tea, that is all. And within this radical simplicity, the participants experience something that touches the edge of Satori, a moment of complete presence, shared in silence, in which the act of making and drinking tea becomes a doorway to the sacred. Hakuin, as we discussed, used painting and calligraphy as teaching tools, bold, spontaneous brush strokes that captured the energy and immediacy of awakening far more effectively than any written treatise. His most famous image, a scowling, thick-browed Bodhidharma, rendered in just a few fierce strokes of black ink, has become one of the most recognized images in all of Zen. It radiates presence. It radiates intensity. It says, without words, wake up, right now. Do not wait. All of these art forms share something in common with Satori itself. They value direct experience over explanation, simplicity over complexity, presence over performance, and naturalness over artifice. They invite you to stop thinking and start seeing. To notice what is actually in front of you, rather than what your mind tells you should be there. And in this way, Zen aesthetics become a kind of meditation in themselves, a way of training the eye, the hand, and the heart to perceive the world as it is, unfiltered, unadorned, exactly as it is, and somehow in that bare exactness, infinitely beautiful. We have talked about Satori, about koans, about Zazen. We have met Bodhidharma, Huineng, and Hakuin, and throughout all of this, a question has been hovering in the background, a question that has been debated within Zen Buddhism for over 1,000 years. The question is this: does enlightenment come suddenly, in a single blinding flash, or does it arrive gradually through years of patient, sustained practice? And the answer, as you might expect from a tradition built on paradox, is both, and neither. The two major schools of Japanese Zen, Rinzai and Soto, are often characterized along these lines. Rinzai, the story goes, emphasizes sudden enlightenment. Soto emphasizes gradual cultivation. But this is, as many Zen teachers have pointed out, an oversimplification that borders on distortion. Let us look at each school more carefully. The Rinzai school traces its lineage to the Chinese master Linji Yixuan, who lived in the 9th century. In Japanese, his name is rendered as Rinzai Jaijin. Linji was famous for his fiery, confrontational teaching style. He shouted at his students. He struck them. He asked impossible questions and refused to accept rational answers. His entire approach was designed to jolt the student out of their habitual patterns of thinking, to create such pressure, such confusion, such disorientation, that the mind finally gives up its attempt to control the situation. And in that surrender, Satori flashes through. The Rinzai school, as it developed in Japan, especially under the influence of Hakuin in the 18th century, places enormous emphasis on koan practice. Students are assigned koans by their teacher and work through them in a structured curriculum that can take many years to complete. The interview with the teacher, called dokusen or sanzen, is a central feature of Rinzai training. In these private meetings, the student presents their understanding of the koan, and the teacher either accepts or rejects the response. The process is intimate, demanding, and sometimes quite intense. Rinzai Zen also places great value on the experience of Kensho, that initial breakthrough into awakening. In some Rinzai lineages, the entire training is oriented around producing that first experience. The idea is that once you have seen it, even briefly, you know what you are looking for. You have tasted the water. Now you can find your way back to the well. But, and this is a crucial, but even within the Rinzai tradition, Kensho is not considered the end of the path. It is the beginning. Hakuin himself was emphatic about this. What is to be valued above all else is the practice that comes after Satori is achieved. Kensho opens the door, but you still have to walk through it. You still have to integrate the insight into your daily life. You still have to work on the deeply ingrained habits of ego, attachment, and reactivity that do not magically disappear just because you have had a moment of awakening. Rinzai teachers sometimes describe this as polishing the mirror, the ongoing work of refining your character and deepening your realization over a lifetime of practice. The Soto school, by contrast, traces its lineage to the Chinese master Dongshan Lianji, 9th century, and more prominently to the Japanese master Dogen Zenji, who brought the Keidong teaching from China to Japan in the 13th century. The Soto approach is, in many ways, radically different in emphasis from the Rinzai approach, though, as we shall see, the two are perhaps closer than they appear. The heart of Soto's Zen practice is shikantaza, just sitting. In shikantaza, there is no koan. There is no specific technique. There is no goal to achieve, no experience to pursue, no breakthrough to strive for. You simply sit with complete awareness in the present moment, letting everything arise and pass without interference. And here is the revolutionary idea at the core of Soto Zen. Practice itself is enlightenment. You do not practice in order to become enlightened at some future point. The practice of sitting right now, in this moment, with full presence and awareness, is itself the expression of your original Buddha nature. There is nothing to attain because you are already what you are seeking. Dogen called this the oneness of practice and realization. They are not two separate things, a means and an end. They are one and the same. This teaching can be confusing, especially if you are coming from a Rinzai framework that emphasizes the pursuit of Kensho. If practice is already enlightenment, then why practice at all? Why sit in Zazen? Why endure the discomfort, the boredom, the endless stream of distracting thoughts? Dogen's answer to this question is one of the most subtle and profound ideas in all of Buddhist philosophy. He says, precisely because we are already enlightened, we must practice. Not because practice will make us something we are not, but because practice is how our inherent enlightenment expresses itself in the world. A flower does not bloom in order to become a flower. It blooms because blooming is what flowers do. A bird does not sing in order to become a bird. It sings because singing is its nature, and a Buddha does not sit in Zazen in order to become a Buddha. A Buddha sits in Zazen because sitting in Zazen is what Buddhas do. This is what Soto teachers mean when they say, Zazen itself is Satori. Now, it is tempting to see these two schools as fundamentally opposed Rinzai as the school of sudden awakening, Soto as the school of gradual cultivation. But as one Zen teacher observed, we think of Rinzai Zen as stressing the sudden enlightenment, and Soto Zen as emphasizing gradual polishing and gradual awakening. But in Rinzai Zen, even though there is a big push for Satori, it is always said that Satori is just the beginning of the path, after which you have to work for many, many years on polishing your character. So they are both sudden and gradual. And the same is found in Soto Zen. In fact, both schools trace their lineage back to the sixth patriarch Huineng and the southern school of Chan, which championed sudden enlightenment. The distinction between sudden and gradual, while useful as a shorthand, does not hold up under close examination. Soto Zen is not really gradual in the way that word is normally understood, because gradual implies stages of development, and Soto Zen explicitly rejects the idea of stages, and Rinzai Zen is not really sudden in the simple sense either, because the sudden breakthrough typically occurs only after years or decades of sustained, disciplined practice. Perhaps the most honest way to put it is this: the truth itself is neither sudden nor gradual. It simply is. And different people with different temperaments and different life circumstances find different paths to seeing it. Some need the intensity, the pressure, the confrontation of koan practice. Others need the spacious quietude of shikantaza. Some need both at different points in their lives. The moon is the same, whether you see it reflected in a rushing stream or in a still pond. Dogen Zenji deserves a closer look, because his teaching has had a profound influence not only on Soto Zen, but on our broader understanding of what enlightenment means and how it relates to everyday life. Dogen was born in 1200 in Kyoto, the imperial capital of Japan, into a noble family. His mother died when he was just 7 years old, and it is said that watching the incense smoke rise at her funeral planted in him a deep awareness of the impermanence of life. This awareness would drive him for the rest of his years. As a young man, Dojin entered the Tendai school of Buddhism, the dominant Buddhist institution in Japan at the time. But he quickly became troubled by a question that his teachers could not answer. The question was this: if, as Mahayana Buddhism teaches, all beings already possess Buddha nature, then why do we need to practice at all? If we are already enlightened, what is the point of meditation, of study, of discipline? This question tormented Dojin. And because his Tendai teachers could not give him a satisfying answer, he left and began studying with Myozan, a disciple of Eisai, the monk who had first brought the Rinzai lineage from China to Japan. Under Myozan's guidance, Dojin began practicing Zazen and studying koans. But still, the question nagged at him. In 1223, Dojin made the difficult sea journey from Japan to China, accompanied by Myozan. He spent 4 years there, visiting various monasteries and studying with multiple teachers. It was during this journey that he met the man who would change his life, a Chinese master named Rujing, the abbot of Tiantong Monastery and the 13th patriarch of the Caodong lineage. Rujing was a teacher of exceptional rigor. He insisted on Zazen above all other practices. He was known for his marathon meditation sessions, often sitting through the night, and for his disdain of anything that smacked of spiritual laziness or complacency. Under Rujing's guidance, Dojin threw himself into practice with total commitment. And then one day, during an intensive sitting period, Rujing noticed another monk falling asleep and scolded him sharply. In Zazen, body and mind are cast off. Why do you sleep? Hearing these words, body and mind are cast off, Dojin experienced a profound awakening. The Japanese phrase is Shinjin Datsuraku, and it became one of the most important concepts in all of Dojin's teaching. To cast off body and mind does not mean to abandon the physical world or to suppress mental activity. It means to let go of the habitual, compulsive identification with body and mind as mine, to drop the possessive grip that the ego maintains on every experience. When that grip loosens, what remains is not nothingness, but a radical openness, an awareness that is free from the narrow confines of self. Dojin later described his experience by saying, "I came home empty-handed. I have realized only that the eyes are horizontal and the nose is vertical." This is one of the most famous lines in all of Zen literature, and it captures something essential about the nature of Satori. What did Dojin realize in China? Nothing extraordinary, nothing that anyone would call a remarkable discovery. The eyes are horizontal and the nose is vertical. The most ordinary, obvious fact in the world, but seen with fresh eyes, seen without the overlay of conceptual thinking. This simple, obvious fact becomes a revelation. Everything is exactly as it is, and that is enough. After returning to Japan in 1227, Dojin spent the rest of his life establishing the Soto school and writing prolifically. His masterwork, the Shabo Genzo, or Treasury of the True Dharma Eye, is a collection of 95 essays that constitute one of the most important works of Buddhist philosophy ever written. In these essays, Dojin explores topics ranging from the nature of time to the practice of cooking, from the correct way to wash your face to the deepest questions of existence and non-existence. His writing is dense, elusive, and often breathtakingly beautiful. One of Dojin's most quoted passages comes from the Genjikon, the first essay in the Shabogenzo. To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things of the universe. To be enlightened by all things of the universe is to cast off the body and mind of the self, as well as those of others. This is, in many ways, a perfect distillation of the entire Zen path. It begins with self-study, with turning your attention inward and honestly examining who and what you really are. But self-study does not end with self-knowledge. It leads, paradoxically, to self-forgetting, the release of the obsessive concern with me and mine that characterizes ordinary consciousness. And when the self is forgotten, when that clenched fist of identity finally opens, then the world rushes in. Everything becomes a teacher. Every sight, every sound, every sensation is an expression of the awakened reality that you were looking for all along. For Dojin, this was not a one-time event. It was a way of living. Enlightenment was not a peak experience that you climbed to and then descended from. It was the fabric of daily life itself, washing the dishes, sweeping the floor, bowing to a fellow practitioner, watching the snow fall outside a mountain window. All of it, every moment, was an opportunity to express and deepen the realization. Dojin also wrote what might be the single most beautiful description of the relationship between the self and the natural world in all of Buddhist literature. In the Shabogenzo, he imagines a fish swimming in the ocean and a bird flying through the sky. When a fish swims, it swims on, and there is no end to the water, he wrote. When a bird flies, it flies on, and there is no end to the sky. There was never a fish that swam out of the water or a bird that flew out of the sky. The fish does not need to understand the entire ocean before it can swim. The bird does not need to map the entire sky before it can fly. They simply use what they need, moment by moment, and in every moment, they have perfect freedom. In the same way, Dojin suggests, our practice of Zazen does not require us to comprehend the totality of enlightenment before we can begin. We simply sit. We use this moment. And at this moment, we are already completely free. This image, the fish in the water, the bird in the sky, offers a remarkably gentle and accessible picture of spiritual life. It removes the anxiety, the striving, the sense that enlightenment is some faraway mountain that we must painfully climb. Instead, it says, you are already swimming in the ocean. You are already flying through the sky. You just do not realize it yet. And Zazen is the practice through which that simple, obvious, world-changing recognition becomes possible. Dojin died in 1253 at the age of 53. His final years were marked by illness, but he continued teaching and writing until very near the end. The monastery he founded, Aiheiji, the Temple of Eternal Peace, nestled deep in the mountains of what is now Fukui Prefecture, remains one of the two head temples of the Soto Zen school today, and is widely regarded as one of the most rigorous Zen training centers in the world. More than 700 years after his death, monks still practice there in essentially the same way that Dogen taught, rising before dawn, sitting in zazen, eating in silence, working in the gardens, and going to bed exhausted, only to rise and begin again the next day. The rhythm of that daily life, unbroken, unremarkable, utterly committed, is itself the teaching. It is Dogen's answer to his original question. If we are already enlightened, why practice? Because practice is what enlightenment looks like when it puts on a robe and walks into the meditation hall. Throughout the long history of Zen, the experience of Satori has been described by countless individuals, monks and nuns, teachers and students, young seekers, and weathered old masters. Each account is unique, and yet certain common threads weave through all of them. A sudden shift in perception, a sense of vast openness, an overwhelming joy or tenderness, and the strange recognition that what has been found was never actually lost. One of the most beloved stories comes from the nun Chiyono, who lived in Japan in the 13th century. She studied Zen under the master Bucko of Engaku for many years, struggling to attain the insight that her teacher pointed toward. Then one moonlit night, she was carrying water in an old wooden pail bound with bamboo strips. The bamboo was old and weak, and as she walked, it finally gave way. The bottom of the pail fell out, the water rushed away, and the moonlight that had been reflected in the surface of the water vanished. In that instant, Chiyono was awakened. She composed a poem in this way, and that I tried to save the old pail, since the bamboo strip was weakening and about to break, until at last the bottom fell out. No more water in the pail, no more moon in the water. The beauty of this story lies in its ordinariness. It was not a grand meditation retreat that brought Chiyono to awakening. It was not a koan or a teaching from a famous master or a pilgrimage to a sacred site. It was a broken pail, a moment of loss, something falling apart, and in that falling apart, a revelation. The water is gone. The moon's reflection is gone, but the moon itself, the real moon, hanging in the sky, was always there. It was only the reflection, the image, the mental picture of the moon that disappeared. And with it disappeared the illusion that the reflection was the real thing. Another account comes from the Chinese master Zhangyin Shixian, who lived in the 9th century. Zhangyin had studied under the great teacher Beizhang, and after Beizhang's death, under Beizhang's student Gishin. Despite years of intense study, Zhangyin could not attain the insight that his teachers demanded of him. Gishin pushed him relentlessly, and Zhangyin became increasingly frustrated. Finally, in despair, Zhangyin burned all his books and notes and retreated to a remote hermitage, convinced that he would never attain awakening. He resigned himself to a simple life of sweeping the grounds and tending a garden. Then one day, while sweeping, a pebble flew up and struck a stalk of bamboo. The sharp, clear talk of stone hitting bamboo cut through the silence of the garden, and in that sound, Zhangyin was enlightened. He dropped the broom, returned to his hut, and composed a poem thanking his teacher for not answering his question. Because if the teacher had given him the answer, he would never have arrived at this moment of seeing for himself. Then there is the experience of Hakuin's own student, a woman known simply as Mrs. DK, a Canadian housewife who practiced Zen in the 20th century. Her account, recorded in Philip Kaplow's influential book, The Three Pillars of Zen, describes her experience during an intensive session. After days of sitting, too exhausted to continue, but too committed to stop, she slipped out of the meditation hall and went to take a bath. While in the bathhouse, something shifted. The boundaries of her sense of self suddenly dissolved. She began laughing uncontrollably, joyfully, at the sheer absurdity of having searched so hard for something that was right there all along. These stories, separated by centuries and continents, share a common structure. In each case, the practitioner has reached a point of exhaustion, a point where the seeking mind has spent itself completely. The books have been burned. The pail has broken. The body is too tired to sit another minute, and in that moment of giving up, of total surrender, the gate swings open. This is not to say that Satori requires suffering, or that you must push yourself to the breaking point. Many teachers warn against that kind of forced intensity. The Soto tradition, in particular, emphasizes a gentler approach, one that does not chase after breakthrough experiences, but simply trusts the practice to do its work. If you are gentle, encouraging, and consistent with yourself, one modern Soto teacher advises, your meditation practice will naturally deepen and lengthen. But what all these stories do suggest is that Satori tends to arrive when the self-conscious, goal-oriented, controlling mind finally steps aside. When you stop trying to make it happen, when you stop evaluating your progress, when you simply are fully present, unguarded, open. It is worth noting, too, that Satori does not always look the same from the outside. Some people experience it as a dramatic, life-shattering event: tears, laughter, trembling, a sense of the entire universe rearranging itself. Others describe it as something quiet and almost unremarkable, a gentle settling, a soft oh, a subtle but unmistakable shift in the way things appear. One teacher compared it to walking through a glass door that you did not know was there. You were on the other side all along. You just could not see it. And importantly, Satori is not necessarily a one-time event. Many Zen teachers describe a pattern of repeated awakenings, each one deepening and expanding the initial insight, each one revealing new dimensions of what was first glimpsed. The Chinese master Sheng Yen put it this way: you should have enlightenment experiences again and again, and support them with continuous practice. Even though Chan says that at the time of enlightenment, your outlook is the same as of the Buddha, you are not yet a full Buddha. The realization must be lived, tested, refined, and integrated into the whole of one's life. This is the work of decades, perhaps the work of a lifetime. In recent years, the ancient practice of meditation, the same practice that underlies the Zen path to Satori, has become the subject of serious scientific investigation. Researchers using tools like functional magnetic resonance, imaging, electroencephalography, and other brain scanning technologies have begun to map the neurological changes that occur in the brains of experienced meditators. And while science cannot and does not claim to measure Satori itself, the findings offer a fascinating window into the biological underpinnings of the contemplative experience. One of the most consistent findings in meditation research is that sustained practice leads to structural changes in the brain. A 2014 meta-analysis published in Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews, which examined 21 neuroimaging studies involving a total of about 300 meditation practitioners found consistent differences between the brains of meditators and non-meditators in several key regions. These included the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in meta-awareness and executive function, the sensory cortices and insula, which are associated with body awareness, the hippocampus, which plays a role in memory, and the anterior cingulate cortex, which is linked to attention regulation. In simpler terms, people who meditate regularly tend to have thicker cortical tissue in areas of the brain responsible for attention, self-awareness, and emotional regulation. Their brains also show increased connectivity between different regions, suggesting a more integrated, flexible style of neural processing. Perhaps even more striking are the findings related to the default mode network, or DMN. The default mode network is a set of brain regions that become active when we are not focused on any particular task. When the mind is wandering, daydreaming, ruminating, or engaged in the constant self-referential inner monologue that characterizes much of our waking life. This is the voice in your head that says, "What should I have for lunch? Did I lock the door? Why did she say that to me yesterday? I wonder what people think of me. Am I good enough? What is going to happen next?" And so on, endlessly. Research has shown that experienced meditators exhibit significantly reduced activity in the default mode network compared to non-meditators. Their minds are, quite literally, quieter. The constant chatter of self-referential thinking, what Buddhists might call the activity of the ego, is toned down. And this is not just during meditation. Studies suggest that long-term practitioners show reduced DMN activity even when they are not meditating, indicating that the practice has produced lasting changes in the baseline state of their brains. This finding is particularly relevant to our discussion of Satori, because one of the hallmarks of the Satori experience, as described by Zen teachers across the centuries, is the temporary cessation of the self-referential thinking process. The I drops away. The internal narrator falls silent, and what remains is a direct, unmediated awareness of reality as it is, not filtered through the lens of personal narrative, not colored by anxiety about the future or regret about the past. Just this, right here, right now. In a groundbreaking 2025 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, researchers at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai used intracranial electroencephalogram recordings, electrodes implanted deep within the brain, to measure neural activity during meditation in real time. They found that even first-time meditators showed measurable changes in brain wave activity in the amygdala and hippocampus, regions critically involved in emotional regulation and memory. Specifically, the researchers observed changes in beta and gamma wave patterns, the same types of brain waves that are disrupted in mood disorders like depression and anxiety. It was quite amazing to uncover changes in brain wave activity in these key regions, even during first-time meditation, the lead researcher noted. The implication is striking. The practice of sitting still and turning attention inward, the same practice that monks have been doing in caves and monasteries for 25 years, has a measurable, almost immediate effect on the most ancient, emotionally primitive structures of the human brain. Other research has shown that experienced meditators demonstrate increased cortical thickness, reduced amygdala reactivity, meaning they respond less intensely to stressful or threatening stimuli, improved neurotransmitter balance, and even slower age-related decline in gray matter volume. A 2015 study comparing long-term meditators to non-meditators found that while both groups showed age-related brain tissue loss, the rate of loss was significantly slower in meditators, suggesting that meditation may, in a very real sense, slow the aging of the brain. Now, it is important to approach these findings with appropriate caution. The field of meditation neuroscience is still relatively young, and many of the studies have limitations: small sample sizes, lack of replication, difficulty controlling for confounding variables. Not every study produces the same results. And the relationship between measurable brain changes and subjective spiritual experience is, to put it mildly, not straightforward. You can have all the right brain waves and still not experience Satori. And you can have a profound awakening that does not show up on any brain scan. But what the research does suggest, at minimum, is that the contemplative practices at the heart of Zen Buddhism are not merely cultural artifacts or religious rituals. They produce real, measurable changes in the physical organ that generates our experience of reality. The brain is not a fixed, static structure. It is plastic, responsive, and capable of remarkable transformation. And the ancient discovery that sitting in stillness and turning attention inward can fundamentally alter the way a human being perceives and relates to the world. A discovery made by the Buddha 250 years ago, refined by Bodhidharma, Huineng, Dogen, and Hakuin, and practiced today by millions of people around the world, is now being confirmed by the tools of modern science. But here is perhaps the most important thing to say about Satori as we bring this journey toward its close. Science can measure brain waves. It can map neural pathways. It can quantify cortical thickness. What it cannot do, what no technology can do, is give you the experience. Satori is not information. It is not data. It is not a concept that can be transmitted through words, no matter how precise or eloquent those words might be. D.T. Suzuki understood this deeply, which is why he spent his entire career trying to describe the indescribable, while simultaneously admitting that description was impossible. "You and I sip a cup of tea," he wrote. "That act is apparently alike to us both, but who can tell what a wide gap there is subjectively between your drinking and my drinking? In your drinking, there may be no Zen, while mine is brimful of it. The cup is the same. The tea is the same. The difference is in the awareness, and that awareness cannot be borrowed, purchased, or downloaded. It can only be cultivated through practice, through patience, through the willingness to sit with yourself honestly without distraction. For as long as it takes, Satori is not a distant goal reserved for saints and monks on remote mountaintops. It is, according to every teacher in the Zen tradition, the birthright of every living being. It is your original face, the face you had before your mother and father were born. It is the sound of one hand. It is the ordinary mind. It is the bamboo striking the pebble, the cricket chirping in the garden, the bottom falling out of the old wooden pail. It is right here. It has always been right here. The only thing standing between you and Satori, the Zen masters say, is the belief that something stands between you and Satori. When that belief drops away, when the grasping mind finally loosens its grip, when the question exhausts itself and leaves only silence, what remains is what was always there. Clear, luminous, perfectly ordinary, and more vast than anything you could have imagined. There is a poem written by the 13th century master woman Huikai after 6 years of struggling with the koan mu, after 6 years of sitting with a single syllable until his mind could go no further. Until one morning, a drum sounded and everything opened, a thunderclap under the clear blue sky. All beings on earth open their eyes. Everything under heaven bows together. Mount Sumeru leaps up and dances. Under a clear sky, when there is no reason to expect thunder, no storm clouds on the horizon, no warning whatsoever, the thunder comes, and in that moment, the mountain dances. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. If you enjoyed this exploration of Satori and the Zen path to awakening, please consider giving this video a like. It helps more people find these teachings. And if you have not already, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss future videos. We cover the full depth of Zen Buddhism here, one topic at a time, in a quiet space where you can slow down, breathe, and let the words settle in at their own pace. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, the gate is always open. It was never closed. And before we arrive at those scientific findings, let us pause and spend some more time with the stories. Because in Zen Buddhism, stories are not just entertainment. They are not mere illustrations of abstract principles. They are transmissions. Each one is a finger pointing at the moon, and if you follow the finger long enough, with enough patience and openness, you might just catch a glimpse of what it is pointing at. Consider the story of the Emperor Goyozai, who was studying Zen under the master Gyudo. The emperor asked, "In Zen, this very mind is Buddha. Is this correct?" Gyudo answered carefully. "If I say yes, you will think that you understand without understanding. If I say no, I would be contradicting a fact which you may understand quite well." On another day, the emperor asked, "Where does the enlightened man go when he dies?" "I know not," said Gyudo. "Why don't you know?" the emperor pressed. "Because I have not died yet," Gyudo replied. The emperor sat with this, unable to penetrate it. His mind spun in circles, trying to find a foothold, and then Gyudo slapped the floor with his hand, a sudden, sharp crack that split the silence of the room. And the emperor was enlightened. Notice what happened here. The emperor was trapped in thought, going round and round, trying to use his intellect to grasp something that the intellect cannot reach. And Gyudo did not give him a lecture. He did not explain Zen philosophy. He slapped the floor. A sudden, unexpected physical interruption that cut through the mental fog like a blade. And in that gap, in that moment before the mind could restart its machinery, the emperor saw. This is a perfect example of what Zen teachers call upaya, skillful means. The method is not important. What matters is the result. Sometimes the method is a koan. Sometimes it is a blow. Sometimes it is a shout. Sometimes it is a simple, everyday remark. "Have you eaten your breakfast?" Then go wash your bowl. The master reads the student and finds exactly the right lever to pull at exactly the right moment. Or consider one of the most famous stories in all of Zen, the story often called a cup of tea. During the Meiji era in Japan, which lasted from 1868 to 1912, a university professor came to visit the Zen master Nanin to inquire about the nature of Zen. Nanin graciously served tea. He poured the professor's cup full and then kept pouring. The tea overflowed, spilling across the table, dripping onto the floor. The professor watched in alarm and finally could not restrain himself. "The cup is full. No more will go in." "Like this cup," Nanin replied, "you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" This story, simple as it is, contains a teaching that goes straight to the heart of Satori. The obstacle to awakening is not a lack of information. It is not a deficiency of intelligence or effort. The obstacle is fullness, the mind so packed with concepts, beliefs, assumptions, and intellectual frameworks that there is no room for anything new to enter. Satori requires emptiness. Not the emptiness of ignorance, but the emptiness of receptivity. The willingness to set aside everything you think you know and approach reality with what the Zen tradition calls beginner's mind. Shunryu Suzuki, the Japanese master who founded the San Francisco Zen Center, and whose book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, became one of the most widely read Zen texts in the West, famously said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." Satori, in this sense, is a return to the beginner's mind, a dropping of all the accumulated expertise, all the carefully constructed intellectual edifices, and a willingness to see with fresh, unconditioned eyes. There is another dimension of the Satori discussion that is worth exploring in depth, and it has to do with one of the great paradoxes of the Zen path, the paradox of seeking. On one hand, the entire Zen tradition is oriented toward awakening. Monks shave their heads, leave their families, endure years of grueling training in remote monasteries, all for the sake of Satori. Hakuin tells his students to generate great doubt, to throw themselves into koan practice with every fiber of their being. The urgency is real. The commitment is total. And yet, on the other hand, every Zen teacher worth their salt will tell you that the very act of seeking enlightenment is the biggest obstacle to finding it. The more you pursue it, the more it runs from you, one master warned. Dogen wrote that practice and enlightenment are one. There is no gap between them, no distance to cross. And Huineng's poem says it plainly. Originally, there is not one thing. If there is nothing to attain, then seeking is, by definition, a movement in the wrong direction. How do you resolve this contradiction? Well, you do not. You live it. You practice with total commitment while simultaneously releasing all attachment to the outcome of your practice. You sit in zazen as if your hair is on fire, and you need to put it out, one of Dogen's own images. And at the same time, you sit without any goal, any expectation, any agenda. You hold the koan as if your life depends on it, and you let go of the idea that there is an answer. This is what Zen calls the razor's edge, and walking it is, in many ways, the practice itself. The Japanese word mushitoku captures this beautifully. It means without gaining mind, or without any expectation of reward. It is the attitude of doing something purely for its own sake, not because it will get you somewhere, not because it will improve you, not because it will earn you spiritual brownie points. Just doing it. Sitting because sitting is what needs to be done. Breathing because breathing is happening. Being present because the present moment is the only moment there is. And well, here is the irony. It is precisely when you stop looking for Satori that Satori tends to find you. Story after story in Zen literature follows this pattern. The practitioner struggles for years, pushing and straining, getting nowhere. Then they give up. They burn their books like Yin. They stop trying to meditate and just go sweep the yard. And that is when the pebble hits the bamboo. That is when the bottom falls out of the pail. That is when the cricket chirps and the universe rearranges itself. Giving up, in this context, does not mean quitting the practice. It means releasing the ego's stranglehold on the practice. It means letting the practice practice you, rather than you practicing the practice. It is the moment when, as the Zen teachers say, the bottom of the barrel falls out, when the seeker and the seeking and the thing being sought all collapse into one seamless, undivided reality. Let us return, briefly, to the relationship between Satori and daily life. Because one of the most persistent misconceptions about Zen enlightenment is that it removes a person from the ordinary world, that the awakened master lives in some rarefied state of permanent bliss, floating above the mess and struggle of human existence. Nothing could be further from the truth. After the Buddha's awakening under the Bodhi tree, he did not remain in meditation forever. He got up. He walked to the deer park at Sarnath, found his 5 former companions, and delivered his first sermon. He spent the next 45 years of his life walking from village to village, teaching, counseling, mediating disputes, and responding to the needs of an ever-growing community of followers. He got tired. He got sick. He grew old. He died. He lived a fully human life. And the same is true of every great Zen master we have discussed tonight. Hakuin spent 40 years teaching in a tiny village at the base of Mount Fuji, living in poverty, painting pictures for illiterate farmers. Dojin devoted himself to the most mundane details of monastic life, writing entire treatises on how to cook, how to wash, how to use the toilet, how to fold your robe. He insisted that these trivial activities were not obstacles to enlightenment, but expressions of it. In the Soto Zen tradition, there is a concept called genjikon, a term coined by Dojin that is notoriously difficult to translate. It is sometimes rendered as the realized universe, or actualizing the fundamental point. But what it really means is this: every moment of daily life is an opportunity to manifest awakening, not just the moments spent on the meditation cushion. Every moment, cooking rice, walking to the mailbox, pouring a glass of water, having a conversation with a stranger. The famous Zen saying attributed to the Chinese master Baso, Mazu, captures this perfectly. Ordinary mind is the way. Not an extraordinary mind, not a mystical mind, not a special meditation experience mind. Ordinary mind. The mind that sees the dishes in the sink and washes them. The mind that notices the rain on the window and does not need it to be anything other than rain. The mind that is fully present in the moment, without grasping or avoiding, without commentary or judgment. This is what Zen teachers mean when they say that Satori is not an escape from the world, but a deeper engagement with it. After awakening, you do not stop being human. You stop pretending to be something other than human. The anxiety, the self-consciousness, the constant effort to be somewhere else or someone else, that is what falls away. What remains is a person who is, for the first time perhaps, genuinely at home in their own life. The master Ryokan, who lived a solitary, impoverished life in a tiny hut at the foot of a mountain in 18th century Japan, embodied this teaching with particular grace. One night, a thief crept into Ryokan's hut looking for valuables to steal. He found nothing. The hut was bare. Ryokan came home and found the thief rummaging through his empty dwelling. "You may have come a long way to visit me," Ryokan said gently, "and you should not return empty-handed. Please take my clothes as a gift." The bewildered thief took the clothes and fled. Ryokan sat down naked and gazed up at the night sky. "Poor fellow," he mused. "How I wish I could give him this beautiful moon." That story says more about Satori than 1,000 pages of philosophy ever could. The thief takes the clothes, the material things, the external possessions. But Ryokan's true wealth, the moon, the silence, the vast, spacious awareness that holds everything without clinging, that cannot be stolen. It cannot even be given away, because it is not a thing. It is a way of seeing, a way of being. There is one more aspect of the Zen understanding of Satori that is worth dwelling on as we approach the end of our journey tonight. And it has to do with compassion. In the broader Mahayana Buddhist tradition, from which Zen emerged, the ideal is not the solitary seeker who achieves personal liberation and disappears into nirvana. The ideal is the bodhisattva, the being who awakens to the truth and then turns back toward the world, vowing not to rest until every single sentient being has also been freed from suffering. This is a staggeringly ambitious vow. It is, in human terms, impossible. And yet, it is the animating spirit of the entire Mahayana path. Hakuin understood this deeply. His final awakening, the one he described as the true breakthrough, the one that resolved all his remaining doubts, was not a deeper experience of empty awareness. It was the realization that awakening without compassion is meaningless. "What is the mind of enlightenment?" he wrote. "It is, I realized, a matter of doing good, benefiting others, by giving them the gift of Dharma teaching." And this is perhaps the deepest teaching embedded in the concept of Satori. It is not a private experience. It is not a personal achievement. It is, at its root, a recognition of interconnection, the direct, unmediated seeing that there is no gap between self and other, that the boundaries we draw between ourselves and the rest of the world are convenient fictions, and that the suffering of any being is, in the deepest sense, our own suffering. When the Zen master Joshu was asked, "What is the meaning of Bodhidharmas coming from the West?" which is really another way of asking, "What is the deepest truth of Zen?" he answered, "The cypress tree in the garden. Not a philosophy, not a doctrine, not a spiritual state. A tree right there in the garden, growing, breathing, reaching toward the sun, completely itself, completely alive, completely connected to the earth beneath it and the sky above it, not trying to be anything other than what it is. That cypress tree, in its simple, unself-conscious being, is Satori. And so are you. And so is the person sitting next to you. And so is the sound of the rain, and the taste of your morning coffee, and the ache in your back after sitting too long. and the worry that nags at you about tomorrow, and the memory of someone you loved who is no longer here. All of it, every bit of it, brimful of the truth that Satori reveals. The only difference between a person who has experienced Satori and a person who has not is that the first person knows this. Not believing it. I hope so. Know it. With the kind of knowing that lives in the bones, in the breath, in the soles of the feet touching the floor. The kind of knowing that Hakuin felt when the bell rang, that Huineng felt when he heard the Diamond Sutra, that the Buddha felt when the morning star appeared above the Bodhi tree. And the Zen masters say, that knowing is available to you right now, at this very moment, not at the end of a long journey, not after decades of practice, though decades of practice may be what it takes for the mind to stop getting in its own way. But right now, because your original nature, your original face, before your parents were born, has never been absent. It has never been lost. It has never been damaged or diminished. It is as vast and as luminous as the clear blue sky. The only thing obscuring it is the belief that it is obscured. And one day, maybe on a meditation cushion, maybe while sweeping the yard, maybe in the middle of an ordinary conversation, maybe tonight, listening to these words as your eyes grow heavy and the world softens around the edges, the clouds part just for a moment, and you see, and then the thunder comes under a clear blue sky.